June 6, 1944, the English Channel, just 23 kilometers from the French coast. It's pitch black out there, salt spray slamming over the bow of landing craft Tank 2273. Lieutenant Dean Rockwell's knuckles are white around the radio handset. In the gloom, he can just make out the shadows of 32 amphibious Sherman tanks, their canvas screens sticking up, weird and tall like medieval siege towers on the edge of the world. The message comes in from Task Force O. H hour is set. A630 obstacles spotted. German fortifications still stand, heavy and forbidding. Captain Ned Elder of the 743rd Tank Battalion lifts his binoculars and studies the 5-foot swells. In that moment, he makes a call that will save hundreds of American lives. The DD tanks, those supposed swimming Shermans, aren't going to swim this morning. They're riding all the way to the sand. Nobody on those pitching decks realizes what this one decision will spark. Right there, in the chaos of Normandy, Elder sets in motion the wildest armored breakthrough the European theater will see. The Germans have learned to trust their machines. Their Tigers and Panthers, big cats in the hedgerows, have crushed everything thrown at them. Thick armor, those monstrous 88mm guns, and German engineering that seems to shrug off everything but a direct hit. The Wehrmacht's doctrine is all about kill zones, hundreds of hidden guns, tank traps, and obstacles that funnel Allied tanks straight into the jaws of waiting panzers. But the Shermans keep coming. Out there, they slog through the channel at 4 knots, engines groaning, 33 tons of steel and raw nerve. Each M4A4 Sherman, with its duplex drive, pushes enough water to flood a small house. On LCT 600, Staff Sergeant Paul Reagan stands up in the commander's hatch, scanning the horizon, thinking through the odds. His tanks loaded 90 rounds for the main gun, almost 5,000 .30 caliber rounds, and a whole invasion's worth of hopes and nerves. The Sherman isn't glamorous. It's American industry, plain and simple. While the Germans pour fortunes into their Tigers, 250,000 Reichsmarks a pop, and a nightmare to keep running, the U.S. just keeps building Shermans. Ship them across the Atlantic, hand them to farm boys who can fix a combine, and let them loose. Chrysler's Detroit plant alone turns out over 400 a month in 44. The numbers are lopsided. Germany barely manages 100 Tigers a month at best. America pumps out over 2,000 Shermans when production's at its peak. Add up reliability, fuel economy, and the fact that you can fix a Sherman with a wrench and some grit, and the advantage gets ridiculous. Take William Focusad, tank commander with the 743rd. He trained out in Camp Laguna, Arizona, under a sun that could peel paint. He'll go on to earn a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, but right now, he knows what really wins tank battles. Not just armor or a bigger gun. He knows it's about hitting the target, keeping up the pressure, and staying one step ahead of the enemy's next move. Meanwhile, on the other side, in Panther 424 from the 2nd Panzer Division, Unreizier Klaus Weber checks his ammo. He's got 79 shells for his long 75mm gun, 4,200 rounds for the machine guns. His tank's got 100mm of frontal armor, sloped for even more stopping power. The American 75mm can't punch through from more than 100 meters away. But the Panther's heavy, 45 tons, and its Maybach engine guzzles fuel like there's no tomorrow. On roads, it gets a mile per gallon. Off-road, half that, if you're lucky. But dug in, hull down behind a hedgerow with overlapping fields of fire, the Panther doesn't need to move. It just needs to kill. German defenses at Omaha Beach are the result of 2 years of back-breaking work. Whitestan's Nest 62 overlooking easy red sector is packed with machine guns, a 50-meter anti-tank gun, mortar pits, the works. Heinrich So, behind his MG-42, later claims he fired off over 12,000 rounds that morning. Historians scoff at that number. Nobody could reload that fast or keep up that rate with the casualties recorded. Still, the kill zones are brutal. No cover, overlapping lines of fire, pre-registered artillery ready to drop shells anywhere on the sand within half a minute. At 5:50 a.m., Captain Elder, up on LCT 2037, wipes spray off his binoculars. Waves are running 5-6 feet, the wind howling in from the west at 18 knots. The DD tank's canvas screens were never meant for this. They're only good for 3-foot seas. Of the 64 Sherman DD tanks scheduled to swim for Omaha, only 29 actually try. These are from the 741st on the eastern flank. Of those, 27 will sink before they get anywhere near the beach, swallowed by the cold channel. But Elder's 743rd, they don't launch. They wait, and in doing so, they change everything. His 32 DD tanks, along with their support vehicles, would go straight on to dog green and dog red beaches, riding their LCTs right up to the sand. That meant putting the thin-skinned landing craft in the line of fire. But honestly, what choice did they have? If they tried launching the tanks offshore, they'd risk watching them sink before even getting a shot off. The decision was brutal. Risk the Navy crews and landing craft or lose the tanks and their crews to the sea. At 6:15, the naval bombardment started. USS Texas began hammering the bluffs above Omaha with 14-inch shells. USS Arkansas joined in with 12-inch guns. Smaller destroyers crept in close, just 1,000 yards from the beach, firing at anything that looked like a German strongpoint. The plan was for this barrage to last 40 minutes, smashing German defenses before the first troops hit the sand. But things didn't go as planned. Most of the shells overshot their targets. Clouds hung low, so the bombers released late, and their bombs just landed uselessly in the fields behind the beach. Out of 446 B-24 Liberators that attacked Omaha, not a single bomb actually hit the beach. The Shermans got their first taste of combat at Omaha at 6:29, just a minute before H-hour. Company A of the 743rd Tank Battalion, their tanks fitted with deep wading gear, rolled right off their LCTs into 4 feet of water. They'd waterproofed these tanks with special kits, rigged up improvised stacks on the exhaust so they could trudge through 6 feet of water if they had to. The first tanks reached the shingle, tracks grinding, 75mm guns swinging up toward the bluffs. The Germans didn't hesitate. An 88mm gun in WN-61 fired 8 rounds in 90 seconds. 3 Shermans blew up, their ammo cooking off in huge fireballs visible from the ships offshore. Machine gun fire danced off tank hulls like sparks in a storm. Mortars landed all along the beach, bracketing the tanks with deadly precision. Still, the Shermans kept coming. By 7, 40 tanks had reached Omaha. Some were already burning. Others lost their tracks on obstacles or bogged down in the shingle. But the ones still running started blasting away at German positions, firing directly at pillboxes and gun nests. The effect was instant. German infantry, drilled to expect waves of foot soldiers, suddenly faced armored beasts that could shrug off machine gun fire and answer with high explosives. Technical Sergeant John Ducoen of the 743rd landed in the second wave. At 6:40, his tank took 2 hits from a 50mm anti-tank gun. Both rounds punched through the hull, but missed anything vital. Ducoen's driver, Private First Class Howard Froberg, just gunned it straight at the German gun, while the gunner fired 5 high-explosive shells into the enemy position. The German gun went silent. This set the tone. Tank commanders cut off from each other because salt water had ruined most of their radios, each fought their own fights against whatever German position they stumbled onto. A Sherman might take a dozen hits from small caliber weapons and keep rolling, methodically pounding machine gun nests with its 75 millimeter gun and bow-mounted .30 caliber. That bow gunner, unique to American tanks, turned out to be a real asset for keeping German infantry pinned while the main gun chewed through bunkers. By 7:30, the crisis at Omaha was obvious to anyone watching from offshore. General Omar Bradley from the USS Augusta even thought about sending the follow-up waves to Utah Beach instead. The 16th Infantry Regiment was in pieces. Company A was wiped out as a fighting unit. Company E was down to just 23 men from the original 180. The beach was a mess, destroyed gear everywhere, wounded men huddled behind whatever cover they could find. But the tanks were making a difference. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Plugger, commanding Company C of the 743rd, directed his tanks to take on the fortifications at Les Moulins Draw. They used a trick they'd practiced in training: fire a white phosphorus round to mark the target, then follow up with high explosives. The phosphorus did more than just mark. It burned its way through vision slits and gun ports, forcing the defenders to run for it. At 8:15, Weiderstan's Nest 66 sent a desperate message to German command: enemy tanks on beach. Infantry decimated but tanks advancing. Request immediate anti-tank support. The reply was grim. There were no mobile reserves. The 352nd Division's anti-tank battalion was still 10 miles inland, held back by orders to defend against possible airborne landings. The men on the beach had to hold out with what they had. The Sherman's simple, rugged design really paid off now. Tank Barbara from Company B, commanded by Sergeant Walter Basker, took 7 hits in the first hour, lost 2 bogey wheels, had its turret traverse messed up, and even developed a fuel leak. Somehow, the crew managed field repairs with the basic tools and spare parts they carried inside and kept fighting. By 9 a.m., Barbara was right back in the fight, hitting German positions at Verville Draw. That's really what made the Sherman special. If a Tiger or Panther took a hit, the Germans needed fancy recovery vehicles and expert mechanics to get them running again. But if a Sherman went down, the crew could usually patch it up themselves, scavenging parts from knocked-out tanks nearby. On D-Day, Sherman crews kept pulling off these small miracles. They swapped out tracks while shells flew overhead. As if a gun barrel got smashed, they'd have a new one fitted in 20 minutes. Engines that should have needed depot work. The crews just kept coaxing them back to life, making do with whatever they had. Then, at 8:45, German armor finally showed up. 2 Stoogie 3 assault guns from the 352nd Infantry's battalion opened up on the Shermans from about 800 meters away. Their 75 mm guns could punch right through Sherman armor at that distance, but the Americans had one big edge: numbers. For every German assault gun, 5 Shermans rolled forward. The Stoogies managed to knock out 2 Shermans before the rest swarmed them. Concentrated fire from the Shermans took them out. By 9 a.m., combat engineers, backed up by tanks, had blown open gaps in the seawall at Easy Red Sector. Shermans pushed off the beach, swinging around to hit German positions from the side. This was the moment the tide turned. The German plan relied on keeping the attackers stuck on the sand. Once American armor broke through, everything started falling apart. Private First Class Charles Lombardo of the 731st Tank Battalion was one of the lucky few. He survived the swim to shore in one of just 2 DD tanks that made it. His Sherman was waterlogged and barely running, but it still managed to knock out a concrete bunker at 100 meters, 5 shots with armor-piercing rounds, then a blast of high explosive for good measure. That bunker had held up a whole infantry company, but once it was gone, 150 men moved off the beach. The Germans stuck to their playbook. Panzerfaust teams popped up to ambush the tanks at close range. The Panzerfaust was a nasty little one-shot weapon. At 30 meters, it could punch through 200 millimeter of armor. In the bocage country behind Omaha, every hedgerow could hide a panzer team, but the Americans had learned their lessons at Kasserine Pass and Sicily. They'd drilled tank infantry teamwork over and over. Every Sherman heading inland had infantry, walking alongside, checking every hedge and building for lurking anti-tank teams. At 10:30, German infantry reinforcements showed up with more Panzerfausts. Again, every hedgerow hid danger, but American infantry stuck close to the tanks, rooting out ambushes before they could strike. In the days after D-Day, German armor came in force. Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division and Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion tangled with American tanks near key crossroads and villages. The pattern never really changed. German tanks were better one-on-one, but American tactics focused on fire and maneuver. One Sherman platoon would hold the enemy from the front, while another circled for a shot at the flank. The math was harsh, but it worked. Trading 3 Shermans for 1 Panther seemed fine when U.S. factories churned out 30 Shermans for every Panther the Germans built. By noon, 51 Shermans were still running on Omaha Beach, and just inland they'd lost about 40% of their number, knocked out or wrecked. But they'd done their job. The landing was secure. Reinforcements came ashore without disaster. Most important of all, the psychological shock to the Germans was huge. To the myth of the Atlantic Wall's invincibility was gone. At the 352nd Infantry Division HQ, General Dietrich Kreis spent the morning piecing together scattered reports, American tanks smashing through the beach defenses, strong points falling, enemy armor heading for Colleville. By 1 p.m., he knew Omaha was lost. With no tank reserves left, his infantry could only try to pull back and fight as they retreated. But the Shermans' impact went beyond just shooting up German positions. Their presence let engineers clear mines and obstacles without getting mowed down by machine guns. Their 75mm guns could take out fortifications that even naval bombardment couldn't touch. Maybe most of all, seeing tanks move forward gave American infantry the guts to get off the sand and start advancing. The technical tweaks made for D-Day, like the deep wading gear secretly developed and tested in Scotland, paid off. Tanks landed in deeper water and dodged the worst of the beach obstacles. Waterproof ammo storage turned out to be a lifesaver. When tanks took hits, no massive explosions, just damage. The crews could usually survive, but the real game changer? Armored telephones bolted onto the backs of tanks. Even when radios went down, infantry could still talk to the guys inside the armor. By 2 p.m. on D-Day, American tanks were already pushing inland, aiming for their first-day targets. They weren't moving as fast as they'd hoped, though. The problem was hedgerows. On the aerial photos, they looked like harmless lines dividing fields. In real life, they were ancient earth walls, some as old as the Romans, 3 to 4 feet thick at the base, topped with dense brush and guarded by drainage ditches. Tanks trying to climb over them ended up showing off their thin belly armor, an easy shot for any German anti-tank gunner. Still, nobody just sat there and took it. American soldiers started coming up with fixes on the spot. Sergeant Curtis Culin from the 102nd Cavalry Recon figured out that the Germans' steel beach obstacles, those nasty things meant to rip open landing craft, could be chopped up and welded to the fronts of tanks as makeshift hedge cutters. The idea actually came from a Tennessee soldier named Roberts. "Why don't we stick some saw teeth on the front and cut through these hedges?" Culin knew a good idea when he heard one. Within hours of landing, maintenance crews were out, there with torches, turning the beach defenses into tank upgrades. Meanwhile, the German High Command was in chaos. Hitler, convinced Normandy was just a distraction and the real attack would hit Calais, refused to release his armored reserves. The 2nd SS Panzer Division sat 130 miles from the beaches until late in the afternoon. When they finally got moving, American tanks had already set up blocking positions on every main road into the beachhead. At 4 p.m., Company B of the 743rd Tank Battalion ran into their first Tiger Y near Formigny. This Tiger from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion had rolled out from near Caen to stop the Americans. Its commander, SS Unterscharführer Wilhelm Müller, was a veteran from Kursk, famous for knocking out 19 Soviet T-34s. That 82 8mm gun of his could punch straight through a Sherman from over a mile away, but the Americans didn't just charge in. Lieutenant James Johnson, leading the Sherman platoon, ordered smoke rounds to blind the Tiger. While one Sherman kept the Tiger busy, 3 slipped around through a nearby orchard. The Tiger, locked on its main target, didn't spot the flanking move until it was too late. At just 200 yards, the Shermans hammered 5 rounds into its engine. The Tiger staggered to a stop, smoke pouring out. Müller's crew bailed, and the sight of a burning Tiger rattled German morale. If Shermans could kill Tigers, what hope did the infantry have? Reports to German HQ got bleaker by the hour. Enemy tanks everywhere, Tigers and Panthers knocked out, infantry falling back. Truth was, the Americans paid dearly for every win. For every Tiger taken out by a clever move, Shermans were getting wrecked in head-on fights. But American tactics and production made up for it. The Sherman wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. 2 Shermans fit on a Liberty ship where a single Tiger would go. 3 months training turned a mechanic into a tank fixer. Most important, America could build enough Shermans that losing a few didn't slow them down. By 6 p.m., the 743rd and 741st Tank Battalions had pushed a solid line inland from Omaha Beach. They'd lost 48 tanks with 45 crew dead and 60 wounded. But 58 tanks were still running, and the Atlantic Wall was broken. German losses were tough to count, but the Americans had wiped out multiple bunkers, destroyed 3 assault guns, taken out 1 Tiger and 3 Panthers, and caused hundreds of German casualties. The lessons were obvious. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't punch through the front of a Tiger or Panther, but it shredded bunkers and infantry. The tank itself held up better than anyone expected, even after soaking in salt water, smashing through obstacles and getting hammered in battle. 70% of the Shermans that landed kept fighting all day. German Tigers, on the other hand, broke down just trying to reach the front. 5 out of 6 Tiger 2s shipped to Normandy in July didn't even make it to combat that night. American crews worked straight through till morning. Out came the acetylene torches, and by dawn, 15 Shermans sported crude but effective hedge cutters. Within a week, 60% of American tanks in Normandy had those Rhino devices on the front, named for their horn-like prongs. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, and it helped keep the momentum rolling inland. On June 7th, the German 352nd Infantry Division scribbled in their war diary, "Enemy tank attacks supported by massive artillery have made defensive positions untenable. Withdrawal to second defensive line authorized. That wasn't just a setback, it was a turning point. The Atlantic Wall didn't just crack. American tanks made it irrelevant. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, who led First Army, put it bluntly. The tanks saved Omaha Beach. Without them, we would have been thrown back into the sea. He wasn't exaggerating. Of the 29 infantry companies storming Omaha, half took casualties. The 2 tank battalions lost plenty too, but they kept fighting all day. Those tanks kept disaster from turning into a rout. They turned a near defeat into a bloody victory. In the weeks after D-Day, American armored tactics really took shape. Operation Cobra, launched July 25th, put everything on display. 3,000 aircraft bombed German lines, 700 Shermans, 60% of them fitted with Rhino hedge cutters, smashed through the bocage. That breakthrough ripped Normandy's stalemate wide open and let American armor fight the war it was built for. Fast, aggressive, mobile. Sergeant Culin's hedge cutter became standard almost overnight. 6 weeks after D-Day, 500 Shermans had some kind of hedge-cutting gear. The British whipped up their own called prongs. News spread fast. By August, German intelligence reported all enemy tanks now equipped with hedge-breaking devices, bocage defensive positions no longer tenable. The Germans still had technical edge, especially with the Panther tank. Its long 75mm gun could punch holes in Shermans at ranges where Shermans just bounce shells off Panther armor. But that edge didn't matter enough. Panthers were outnumbered, plagued by breakdowns and hard to keep supplied. The British crunched the numbers. In Normandy, only 37% of Panthers were ready to fight at any time, compared to 70% for Shermans. The numbers game wasn't even close. Germany built about 6,000 Panthers in the whole war. America churned out nearly 50,000 Shermans. If you count all the variants in Normandy alone, over 2,000 Shermans showed up. Even if German tanks managed to knock out 3 Shermans for every Panther lost, a best-case scenario for them, it didn't stop the flood. For every Panther blown apart, 5 more Shermans were there. For every Tiger lost, 10 more Shermans rolled off ships at the Mulberry harbors. By August 1944, German armor in Normandy was shattered. The 2nd Panzer Division started with 180 tanks. By the end, it had 25. The 116th Panzer Division dropped from 120 to almost nothing. The elite 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, could field only 17 tanks out of the 150 it had started with. The Falaise Pocket in mid-August sealed the deal. Surrounded by British, Canadian, Polish, and American forces, German tank crews ditched their vehicles and sprinted for safety. Allied pilots flying overhead saw roads packed with burning Tigers and Panthers, abandoned and useless because nobody could keep them running or fueled in the chaos. American losses were heavy too. The 743rd Tank Battalion alone lost 51 tanks forever in Normandy, and another 80 needed major repairs. More than half the crews were killed or wounded, but the Americans could replace losses. For every Sherman that burned, 2 more came from England. For every crewman lost, 3 replacements waited in the wings. Still, the human cost was brutal. Tank battles in the bocage were up close and deadly, 400 meters apart on average. Whoever fired first usually survived. Tank crews learned a grim sense of humor. The Sherman lights first time, every time, they'd say, borrowing a line from Ronson lighter ads, knowing full well what that meant, but they also knew why they fought. Private First Class. Wayne Robinson, who rode in a tank called Barbara, later wrote, "She wasn't the best tank in the world. The Germans had better, but she was there when we needed her. She took us through hell and got us home. That's all you can ask of a tank or a friend." The technology kept evolving. The British rolled out the Sherman Firefly with a 17-pounder gun that could kill tigers at 1,000 meters. By August, 1 in 4 British Shermans was a Firefly. Americans got Shermans with 70-66 meaty guns starting in July, better, but still not quite a match for German guns. But the real breakthrough wasn't hardware. It was how the Americans used what they had. Their armor doctrine focused on teamwork, speed, and sheer numbers. That's what won the fight. Tanks didn't go into battle alone. They rolled out as part of a team. Infantry on the ground, artillery pounding from behind, engineers breaking obstacles, and fighter planes circling overhead. That's how modern warfare worked. It wasn't about having the single best machine. It was about the whole system working together. Otto Arias, a German tank ace on the Eastern Front who knocked out 150 enemy tanks, figured this out the hard way. He later wrote, "The Americans understood something we didn't. War isn't about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks, enough fuel, spare parts, and men who know what they're doing. We had the best tanks. They had a bit everything else." After the war, people dug into the numbers from Normandy and started to see the real picture. The average Sherman tank got hit about once in combat, 1.2 times if you want to be exact. Of those hit, 60% never fought again. Another 20% could be patched up right there in the field, and the last 20% needed serious work back at the depot. One surprising thing, Sherman crews usually survived about 75% of the time. The guys inside made it out alive thanks to big hatches and lots of training on how to bail out fast. German tanks told a different story. Panthers could take more punishment on average. They absorbed over 2 hits before going down. But once they were knocked out, 80% were lost for good. The Germans just couldn't recover or fix their tanks when they had to retreat. Tiger crews had it even worse. Less than half survived when their tank went up, mostly because of smaller hatches and those nasty ammo fires. Normandy changed how the Americans fought with tanks. They learned their lessons the hard way in those tangled hedgerows. Hedge cutters evolved into dozer blades. Radios connecting tankers with the infantry became standard. And just as important, the myth of German tank invincibility fell apart. American crews realized they could take out Tigers and Panthers if they worked together and used smart tactics. By late August 1944, the impact was obvious. The Allies weren't just winning battles. They'd broken Germany's ability to fight a modern, mobile war in the West. The best German tank units were finished, their crews dead or captured, and their schools back home couldn't churn out new ones fast enough. The fields of Normandy were littered with burned-out panzers. Historians love to pick apart the Sherman tank, say its armor was too thin, its gun too weak, its gasoline engine a fire hazard. All true if you're just looking at technical specs, but war isn't about isolated details. The Sherman was one part of a massive system, factories, supply lines, tactics that beat anything the Germans could pull together. Admiral Bertram Ramsay, who ran the naval side of D-Day, put it well, the success at Normandy wasn't due to any single weapon or tactic. It was the culmination of Allied industrial might, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation. The Sherman tank showed all of that. No one claimed it was perfect. It just did the job. The Sherman's story didn't end in 1945. Its success shaped how the U.S. designed tanks for decades. American doctrine favored building a lot of reliable, flexible machines rather than chasing technical perfection. That thinking carried over to the M48, the M60, and even the early M1 Abrams. Heinz Guderian, the German general who dreamed up Blitzkrieg, summed it up. We made the perfect tank. The Americans made the tank that won the war. There's a lesson in that. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, especially when good enough shows up in overwhelming numbers. Walk along Omaha Beach today, and you'll find a Sherman tank from the 743rd Battalion, still scarred from battle, standing as a memorial. French families still leave flowers there remembering the liberation. The plaque reads, "To those who came in steel coffins to give us freedom." It's a fitting tribute to the citizen soldiers who climbed into so-called inferior tanks and made them superior through guts, creativity, and sacrifice. In the end, the Sherman's success wasn't about thick armor or a big gun. It was about American factories turning out 1,000 tanks a month. It was about farm boys fixing engines under fire. It was about clever inventions like the Rhino hedge cutter, which changed the game overnight. Most of all, it was about the power of mass production and teamwork, a reminder that when it comes to war, numbers really do matter. Look at the stats. In June 1944, Germany had about 1,500 tanks across all fronts. That same month, America alone built 2,000 Shermans. By August, the Allies in Northwest Europe had 4,000 tanks. The Germans had less than 500. At that point, all the tactical brilliance in the world couldn't make up for the sheer weight of numbers. The math settled the argument. The Tiger could win a fight here and there, sure, but by the time the Sherman showed up, the real contest was already over. Field Marshal Erwin RML knew this from the start. He pushed to keep panzer reserves near the beaches, and history proved him right. After his forced suicide in October 1944, people found his notes. In them, he wrote, "The Americans will come with thousands of tanks, not better than ours, but thousands. We cannot stop thousands. The war is lost when the first American tank rolls off the beach." That moment came at 6:29 a.m. on June the 6th, 1944. The first Sherman tanks from Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, crawled onto Normandy's sand. Right there, the West's fate was basically sealed, even though the bloodshed dragged on for months. The Sherman wasn't perfect. It rolled off assembly lines by the thousands, crewed by men who'd been civilians not long before, but it smashed through the Atlantic Wall and kicked off Europe's liberation. Those first 12 hours on D-Day, they changed everything. Military leaders everywhere spent years picking apart what happened at Normandy, and the lesson was clear. In modern war, it's not about having the fanciest tank. It's about building faster, supplying better, adapting quicker. The Sherman didn't just win a fight. It proved a whole new way to wage war. Even now, German tanks still lie buried in Norman fields, Tigers and Panthers, once the pride of 1940s engineering, now quietly rusting away. Their crews, some of the best tankers ever, died inside machines that, on paper, outclassed the Sherman. They fought hard, and both sides respected their skill. But their story closed the book on an era when you could hope to win by being technically better, even if you were outnumbered. From then on, the future belonged to countries that could outbuild, outthink, and outorganize their enemies. The Sherman, flaws and all, became the symbol of that shift. It was never the best tank of World War II. It was just the tank that won it. And in modern warfare, that's what really counts.